Did you know that there are many types of narcissists? One of the reasons identifying people that are narcissistic can be so hard includes the fact that narcissistic traits can present differently between people. Just like there are more than one way a person can become narcissistic, there are also different ways they can behave with people. However, the underlying tone and result is still the same. Chronic exposure to a narcissist can be extremely harmful. Today, I want to do a movie illustration on Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery, to go over the different types of narcissists that are shown in this film. Hi, I am Raysa, a survivor of narcissistic abuse, and I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and you are listening to Hello Trauma Brain, a podcast where I share my experiences living with complex PTSD. My hope is this podcast can help destigmatize mental health and provide support to anyone diagnosed with CPTSD who thinks they might have it or has a loved one with this diagnosis. Quick reminder, I am not a licensed psychologist or mental health care professional, and this podcast is not meant to replace nor substitute the care of psychologists, other mental or medical health care professionals. If you think you might have complex PTSD or PTSD, please reach out to your primary care or mental health care provider. Any individuals and resources mentioned in this episode are not sponsoring Hello Trauma Brain. This episode may reference trauma or abuse, and listener discretion is advised. Remember, you can always pause or skip this episode at any time. And now, let's get back to the episode. Hello, dear survivors, and welcome to this episode of Hello Trauma Brain. Thank you for joining me today. If you are listening on YouTube, a gentle reminder to hit the like button and subscribe to let me know this episode was helpful. Quick check-in. I'll try to make this brief. I am feeling a lot better. It's almost like night and day. It baffles me that almost a week ago, a little bit over a week ago, I was in such a bad place and really not able to see how I could manage. And a week later, it was like a complete 180, feeling so much better, more in control. Part of it was that I exercised asking for help. And I received different responses to my request for help. I reached out to different people, and some people were extremely helpful. Some other people offer alternatives. I actually tried with one person I was not expecting anything from, and they ended up being extremely helpful. And I've been sitting with still struggling to voice when something that it's being offered is not quite helpful or it's hurtful. I'm still struggling with saying something. And for now, I'm still going to give myself a bit of grace, and I'm going to celebrate the fact that I'm noticing that, because I used to not even be able to notice that. And I feel like sometimes the shame is so deep to the point where even when I notice it, which is a big deal and a big step for me, if I didn't say something, I kind of shame myself. It's like, I should have said something. What if they do that to someone else? I owe it to other people to say something. And I kind of go back into that I owe something to these invisible entities, to this shaming of putting all this responsibility on myself. And I kind of struggle with seeing what's really happening, which is that this other person is their behavior, really not my fault. Yeah, not taking responsibility for someone else's behavior or their choice of actions and words. It's interesting. It's just interesting. So I'm still sitting with that. I'm still working on untangling that shame, that shooting myself, that instinct to blame myself for someone else's behavior and for somehow, I don't know, thinking that I can change it in some way. So sitting with that, hopefully in the future I practice voicing a little bit better, because I think that would be a good thing for me. It's not really, when I want to voice it, it's not about changing them, really. That's not the place I'm coming from anymore. It used to be before I started healing, and sometimes it creeps up. But in this case, when I say that I want to work on voicing it, is really more for myself, like practicing saying something for me, and which gives me data. How people react to that can be a powerful way to get to know them a little bit better. And yeah, that's where I'm at. So I also want to acknowledge that it is June, which is Pride Month. So I officially want to say Happy Pride Month to all my listeners and members of the LGBTQIA plus community. I see you, I hear you, and I want to celebrate you. To be honest, I'm feeling a little bummed in terms of I booked some gigs a while back, and now the gigs are conflicting with Pride events nearby, and I'm not going to be able to go. I'm trying to look for alternatives, and I'm going to have to get a little bit creative this year and this month to celebrate my queerness. But I wanted to take a moment to say that I welcome you here in this safe space, and I hope you're finding ways to celebrate you and who you are and your right to exist in this world. And yeah. I'm right there with you, holding your hand. So today, I want to do the monthly illustration, which will be a movie this month. And I want to dive in Glass Onion, which is the sequel to a Knives Out. It's called Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery. And I've been excited to do this episode for a while now, because I've had these notes and all this information since before I even started the podcast. This is back when I was still doing a film club for a group that I was in. And yeah, I've been excited to share this. And the reason I picked it around this time is because June 1st, which was, for me, it was yesterday. For you, as you are listening, it's going to be a few days after, or depending when you're listening, it might be a while after. But June 1st of 2024, I was celebrating and honoring, I should say, that it was World Narcissistic Abuse Awareness Day. And in honor of that, to create more awareness about what narcissistic abuse is and what narcissists are and all that, I want to talk about the different types of narcissists. Before we dive in, because language matters, let me first address what I am referring to here when I say narcissist. I pretty much, like 99% of all the things that I know about narcissism come from Dr. Ramani Durvasula, who I consider the expert on this topic, who's been researching it for many years, has released books. Her most recent book called Is Not You, and I'm still diving into that one. And I have to say, it's a must if you don't have it yet, and if you haven't heard about Dr. Ramani, I strongly recommend her, because she really is the one-stop shop for all things narcissism. Now, when I hear Dr. Ramani talk about narcissism, I wanna take that approach that she does in terms of differentiating what she means by a narcissist, and differentiating the personality style from the diagnosis that's on the DSM called narcissistic personality disorder. Let's talk about that for a moment. So what I'm talking about here today, it's gonna be about the narcissistic personality style. How is that different from narcissistic personality disorder? In order to have narcissistic personality disorder, the way I think about it is that diagnosis is for the narcissist, is for them. Their lives have to be deeply impacted. They need to become somehow aware of this and go into a therapist or a psychologist office and have the professional diagnose them with the disorder, because it's causing chaos in their life. So that being said, today what I'm talking about is a narcissistic personality style. I'm not diagnosing anybody. I am not talking about someone whose life is so impacted by their narcissism that they end up in therapy. I am talking about a personality style, like saying introverted, extroverted, antagonistic. It's really just that. It's a personality style. It has traits. It has a continuum or a spectrum. If you're in this space and if you've seen or been exposed to any content on narcissism, you probably are already aware that there's a lot of pushback when people say narcissist. The word's getting a lot of attention these days, and it's getting misused sadly. And in an effort to make awareness about what I'm talking about, I'm not talking about someone who's just a little self-conceited and likes to post a lot of Instagram only. I'm talking about someone who has all the other ingredients that make their personality style a very hard one to deal with and to interact with in relationships. Okay, so let's talk about the different types of narcissists and how in Glass Onion these types are portrayed in the different characters in the movie. Let's begin with Birdie, who I think is your main portrayal of a benign narcissist. The way I think about a benign narcissist, I honestly, I feel like that word doesn't quite, if I could change it, I would, because I don't know, benign kind of hints at not harmful completely, or maybe like safer, and or not as bad. And I get what that's coming from. However, where I'm gonna put my paw on that word is it's still harmful. It still hurts. Think about the benign narcissist as that teenager that didn't grow up. So is that adult that might be in like their 50s or 60s, but when you interact with them, you almost feel like you're dealing with like a 15-year-old in terms of the emotional maturity of the person, or how they behave. And that's Birdie in the movie. If you take a look at Birdie's character, it's that teenager that didn't grow up. It's like partying all the time, dressing, kind of like a youngster. And before I go on, when I'm talking about these different traits, please take them as a whole. Like, just dressing younger is not the sign. It's like everything else that comes along with it. And one of the prime examples right off the bat as she comes on screen, she's bored. She's bored at this huge party with so many people and so many things going on. And I have to note, the party's happening right at the beginning of COVID, and she's completely dismissing the consequences of having this huge gathering. Like if you still remember the days of COVID at the beginning when we didn't know much about COVID, and, back the first few months where there were a lot of restrictions in place to protect the population, this is in the movie, this is where it's set. So it's like right early on when you're not supposed to be having these huge gatherings because it's really risky, and Birdie doesn't care. Also, Birdie is not allowed to tweet. And one thing she says is one of her quotes that I thought was very, very fascinating. She says, "I say it like I see it." No, and that kind of hints at that no filter, that inability to self-reflect before the thing comes out of her mouth, which, it is showing the lack of empathy, is showing the lack of self-awareness, and that's a big trait when you're talking about narcissistic personalities. When people tell her, answer her questions, she dismisses it. It's almost like there's a bit of an entitlement there, about her. She's the only one who knows the answers, or she's the only one. Her opinion is the only one that matters. So if you're saying something that might go against that, she's not even gonna acknowledge you or be willing to listen to you. She's flashy. I remember that she mocks Claire's looks when she's at the pool in the movie. There's this huge sense of immaturity when you look at her character. In the movie, she's discarded by Miles. So I wanted to point that out because sometimes like people think about narcissists being like abusers all the time, and sometimes they're also getting abused by other narcissistic people they surround themselves with. Not that that excuses in any way their behavior, but I want to point that out just because this stuff can get very complicated, and sometimes, and as a survivor, I feel like that has gotten me stuck before, where I see the narcissist get abused by another narcissist, and I go, oh, but they're also a victim. And yeah, I caution with that, because just because they might be also getting abused doesn't mean that they're not being abusive, and that's where the difference comes. I thought it was interesting. This movie, it's pretty much it's a mystery movie, a murder mystery movie, I should say. And the words matter a lot in this movie, and I thought their word choices were very interesting. And there's a scene where they talk about the seating, and they say that Birdie is triangulated in the seating with a crossbow. And I thought using that word triangulating was so interesting, because triangulation is a dynamic in these with these personality styles. And triangulation looks like, with a narcissist, for example, just a little side note here, it can look like, let's just say you have a friend group with A, B, and C. So A talks to B badly about C, and they might even tell B what C tells A about them, and then they go to C and they do the same thing but with the other person, and it creates this rivalry now between B and C, right? Because B is like, oh, I know C's talking about me behind my back, and C is saying the same thing about B, and sometimes A's not even accurate about what they're saying, and there's a betrayal of trust in this dynamic that A is using to pin B and C against each other, and it's a really harmful and nasty tactic. Back to Birdie, one thing that I thought was interesting is that she calls herself a truth teller. And I've seen this. I feel like narcissistic people, they weaponize traits and things, and they like to weaponize the truth. They tend to be very secretive about things, but when they say something harmful, like weaponizing truth looks like saying something really mean, and after they say something hurtful and you call them out on it, the response is, well, I guess you can't handle it because I just say the truth as I see it. I'm an honest person. And that's toxic. That's not okay. That's abusive. Even if what they're saying is technically, there's a hint of truth in it, the fact that they said it in such a reckless way, and if you call them out on being harmful, like the fact that they're doubling down on still making you the problem for feeling that way, that is problematic. That is what makes these personality styles so harmful, and that's what makes that dynamic abuse. For example, let me give you a healthy example. I feel like sometimes we get caught up in the unhealthy ones, and let me give you an example of a healthy one. If I say something to someone and they approach me and they say, that was hurtful, my instinct is not going to be to double down and say, well, you don't have a right to feel that way. That's not how I meant it. I might have not meant it that way. That might be a true statement, but that doesn't change the fact that the person was hurt by it. So a healthy response would be acknowledging and apologizing first, because I hurt the person with what I said, regardless of what I meant and what I didn't mean or whatever. Acknowledging the hurt first and learning from that, like going like, oh wait, okay, that was hurtful, I don't want to do that again. Like, imagine if I was to be like, well, you need to get used to what I say and not be hurt by it, and you need to start learning how to take better what I say, or I don't know, and any equivalent that dismisses the hurt and doubles down and makes the other person the problem. And this brings me to one of my favorite quotes in this movie. And I remember when I was watching it the first time, the moment I saw that quote, I saw that scene, I was like, I gotta do a film club on this, which is now becoming a movie illustration on this podcast. So Blanc, who is the detective and I'm going to call it the mystery solver in this film, who I will be talking a little bit more later, he tells Birdie when she's calling herself a truth teller, it's a dangerous thing to mistake speaking without thought for speaking the truth. Let me say that one more time because it's so good. It is a dangerous thing to mistake speaking without thought for speaking the truth. Which, by the way, that statement goes completely over her head. And what she replies is something along the lines of like, are you calling me dangerous? Like it's exciting. Like completely unaware that he just put her in her place and called her out on her BS, right? And that is the difference. That is the difference between someone who tells the truth and someone who is being hurtful by weaponizing the truth. And it's all in the delivery. It's all in how you present it. It's in having empathy and self-awareness and self-reflection over how you are coming across. And instead of blaming other people when they confront you about when you've misstepped or misspoke, it's about reflecting and taking that information in and changing. And learning that you need to present it in a different way because the way you did it was hurtful. Birdie also likes to be the center of attention. And it's like that look at me, like she really wants to be on the spotlight. And another thing she says is, and this is almost like her admitting the narcissism, I will do anything to save myself. And that kind of goes back to that self-centeredness, lack of empathy. Only they matter, only their needs matter, and nobody else's. And when you're on the other end of that, oh, it hurts. Moving on to the next type of narcissist we see in this film, I want to talk about Duke, who I think portrays very well what a grandiose narcissist looks like. Now, Duke is an influencer, and again, I want to highlight here, I'm not saying all influencers are narcissists or people who post a lot on social media. I want to talk about, that could be one way, one thing they do in combination with other things. So Duke on this one, he's an influencer. His whole life is in display for validation. So I will be the first one to admit I do post for the podcast on Instagram. I have the accounts I'm trying to run. I don't post a lot, but I do post quite a, at least weekly to try to promote episodes and whatnot. Now, social media, where they get me is with the scrolling. That tends to be like an escape for me. And before I know it, I go to check in notifications. And next thing I know, I've been scrolling for 15 minutes. So I'm trying to work on setting some boundaries with my inner kiddo on that. But with Duke, all these posts, they're really for validation. They're really to give him supply. He's very superficial about his looks, about his life, how things look. His partner, the person he's dating, like everything needs to look in a certain way. I couldn't help to notice right at the beginning when he is introduced into the movie, he tried to set a boundary with his mom, who slaps him in the face. And that reminded me of kind of like that origin of the narcissist. Like, they do come from abuse sometimes. Actually, I would say in probably every time. So I feel like if you're having a healthy upbringing, it's gonna be harder to be a narcissist. But definitely in his case, we kind of got a glimpse of how he became that way. Grandiose is flashy. They are the life of the party, very big in their gestures. When they come in, it's with a loud bam and flash. And you see him throughout the movie when he arrives at the marina, when he's at the pool. He's on the motorcycle, doing a lot of noise. He's got a gun like stuck in the Speedo in the pool. It's over the top, way, way, way out there. At one point, the movie discloses there was a banning due to he had done a scam with some pills he had given to teenage kids, and unable to like recognize that was not okay. It's like almost like justifying it and like criticizing the people that called him out on it, like they are the problem, not what they did. Duke is willing to use his girlfriend to get what he wants. He sees her as an object. It kind of goes back to something I hear Ramani talk about, like narcissistic people see people around them like really like objects, like a spoon, like a coffee cup. You're just there to meet a need, and that's it. And he's not opposed to using his girlfriend Whiskey to get him status and power with Miles. And he even puts her in a situation of selling her. It almost feels like he's selling this girl's body and using her sexuality to get an advantage, and completely unaware of how Whiskey even feels about this. And speaking of Whiskey for a moment, she's with this grandiose narcissist who's using her to get more power with another narcissist who's love bombing the heck out of her. Just for a moment here, Miles surprises Whiskey on her birthday with a penthouse filled with roses and a necklace, and that's your typical grandiose version of love bombing. Off to Claire. I want to talk about the communal narcissist, which I believe might be one of the most recent types that are being recognized now. And the communal narcissist, think about your charity narcissist who's throwing the charity not because they care about the charity and the elephants in the Amazon or whatever. They care about the validation that comes from getting money for the elephants. So they'll throw big galas. I remember Ramani bringing this up, which was very interesting, and it helps put it into perspective. Like, imagine someone who throws this huge gala and they got like a quarter, like a quarter of what they cost it in terms of donations. And next year at the meeting, somebody brings that up and like, actually, we spend like, several times more on the gala than we actually received. And they're like, well, I don't care. I need the gala. We gotta throw the gala. And they don't care that the gala is costing more than what they're able to donate at the end of the day to the charity that they're supposedly trying to support, right? That's a communal narcissist move. When they do the good deed, it's got to be plastered on social media, on the newspaper, on all the forums, and it's all about them getting praised for it. It's all about them hearing how good they are and how generous and wonderful. And someone who throws charities, I mean, I've done charity work myself. It's not about the charity. It's about what happens. Let's just say they go on the charity and they look so generous and amazing and kind, but 2 hours later they were berating the staff that was helping them set up the charity. On the way home they are berating their family. That's the problem. They're abusive. They tend to be abusive behind closed doors, and then in public they tend to look great. And Claire, and you see this with Claire, she's a politician. They appear to be doing good for people. And when at the beginning, when we see her doing the CNN interview, like everything looks good, right, on camera. But in reality, there's like chaos happening behind closed doors and behind the scenes that they don't want CNN to capture during the interview. They're mean. I remember Claire at one point gets triggered. Andy triggers the shame in Claire, and she snaps back with some mean jabs. Claire ends up raging at one point, and that's when you see like when you see that dysregulation, like maybe in the CNN interview they seem very regulated and calm, but then when their shame gets triggered, the rage comes out and it's intense, and almost like they can't stop talking. Claire is that person, that narcissist that's willing to cross the line to get her way. Off to Miles, who I think was if I had to put a type of narcissism, he embodied the malignant narcissist. And I think he crossed the line into psychopathy. And the reason I'm going to say that is because he was willing to murder, and it did not seem to faze him very much. And I want to highlight that difference because narcissistic people, from the information I've seen, they do experience guilt. I do know people that are malignant, and I've seen them feel bad they've done horrible stuff, but I see the guilt after. Now, with a psychopath, they would be as cool as a cucumber, like no thought. They can just go have a steak after doing something horrific and just no guilt there whatsoever. And I want to say Miles gave me that impression. Now, just to talk a little bit about like the malignant narcissist, that's the most dangerous type out of all of them. And one thing I want to note before I continue is, the different types can play off each other. You can have a communal and grandiose narcissist. You can have a malignant narcissist that's also grandiose or communal. Now, I don't know that I could argue that a malignant narcissist could be also benign, because I feel like in order to be malignant, you kind of have to be way past being a benign narcissist. Now, one thing that I've heard with the malignant narcissist, it kind of gets into a newer concept, which I'm still understanding myself. It's called like the dark tetrad, and there's sadism there. Miles, as a malignant narcissist, he's able to cut off Andy completely. Actually, he killed her. He murdered Andy. He does have a lot of grandiose notes to him too. Like when everybody arrives, he's playing this guitar, and he kind of hinted like it was like Paul, and I figure he's referring to like Paul McCartney, and he like uses a guitar to like kind of brag. It's like, oh yeah, Paul wrote with this guitar, and then like throws it on the beach sand like nothing. And it's not, there's no respect for the object. It's just to get what he needs. And, that's a good metaphor, but how they treat people. Like that guitar scene, and you're like, okay, I'm going to use it, play something, reference that Paul McCartney, used this guitar or played it. And then I'm done with this thing. I'm just going to throw it on the sand, and I don't even give a what happens to it. The boundaries are, oh my gosh, horrible boundaries. Like his hugging just feels inappropriate. You can tell people are uncomfortable with his hugs and how long he's hugging and how intense it is. him, having sex with Whiskey, who he knows is dating a Duke. Like, again, just like complete disregard for how his friend can be hurt, even though it turned out that Duke was using Whiskey to get power anyway. But still, like that whole triangle thing was just messed up in every single way. He has, honestly, like, I feel like he also had a bit of a communal aspect to it. Like, communal narcissists, I know they can also be described as like they want to be like saviors. They have that savior complex. They tend to be like the cult leaders. And there's a point where he goes, let's imbreviate this moment together. And it's kind of like that culty, I know how to live, and I'm going to invite you to live my way. And by the way, imbreviate is not even a word. He made it up. But there's this extravagant, grandiose thing, like, oh, we're gonna have this great weekend, and it's kind of like setting the tone of like, get on board with what I want this experience to be. He even brags about like knowing everyone so well that he was able to design the rooms, based on the chakras of each person. And it's that grandiose mindset of, I know you better than you know yourself. You hear the entitlement and the grandiosity in that, right? Like, what if somebody would have not liked the room? I'm sure he would have taken offense in that. He also, and this is something I talked a little bit about last week, secrecy is a thing, right? Not acknowledging the big elephant in the room. And throughout the movie, and I thought this was fascinating, there's this random guy that keeps walking through the property. And Miles acts like he's not even there. And I think at one point he even said, like, we're the only people here. And then the guy walks through and he ignores the guy completely. And nobody asks who he is. At no point do you hear anything about who this guy is. And in fact, the movie ends and you never find out who the hell that is. And that was a powerful statement in that movie that I just thought it captures so well how narcissistic people they really ignore things that are literally walking by and act like they're not there. And, when people are used to that dynamic, they don't even bother asking because they almost like a part of them knows that they're not supposed to. And I would have loved to see someone find out who the heck they were. More signs of the grandiosity, the car on the roof. He had this idea of this is going to be a next level mystery. And when you see the dysregulation and the tantrum is when Benoit figures out the mystery before it even starts, and he takes him aside because he doesn't do it in front of everybody else, and note that, like, how they behave so dysregulated usually when they're behind closed doors. And he's throwing his tantrum because he thought this was going to be like a next level mystery, and he had hired all these people to help him make it, the most complicated and exciting thing he's ever done. And it turned out to be like so predictable, right? And so easy to figure out. And that dysregulated him. That triggered that shame and that lack of staying emotionally mature through disappointment. Another thing he did that was pretty on the malignant side was taking credit for somebody else's idea. Like he stole Andy's idea and fought Andy in court. And he fabricated evidence to win the case and not only steal the idea, but the company, and boot her out. Like, no empathy. That crossing the line to doing all these horrific things. Like, that's your malignant narcissist. They tend to be, I would say they tend to be like the ones that engage in the domestic violence realm and are just, dangerous. Honestly, I would call them dangerous. He gets Birdie to take the fall for the sweatshops too. Like, it's just no empathy, no regard for how other people around them are being hurt. They just have one agenda in their mind and only one that matters, and is them. There's so much fakeness here. He does not write the mystery. He hired people to do it for him. The dock that he had, that grandiose dock he had, apparently did not float, so it was completely unusable. But again, it's with Miles, you see an exaggeration of how important looks are, to the point where even if they're not actually, practical things, it doesn't matter because that's not the goal. The goal is not safety, to have a dock that's safe to be able to dock. The goal is not a place that's safe, a place that is really catered to what people need. It's all about Miles. Now, one thing that was fascinating with Miles was the moment when he does his monologue, his speech on shaking things up. He says it starts small, it gets to an infraction point, and he kind of references something along the lines of like, I'm kind of the person that keeps going, willing to break the thing no one wants you to break. They will call you a bully, even your partner will say that you need to stop, but no one wants to break the system. And he's glorifying disruption. And he uses the reframe of disruption to justify that he got to the line and crossed it. Even though his behavior was egregious and disgusting, in his mind, to him, he is just this glorified disruptor. And in his mind, it was all worth it and justified and okay to do, which is pretty scary. It's pretty scary to have that type of mindset, because where do you stop? Where do you draw the line between this is not ethical and moral anymore? Even if you can get away with it, like, it's just not okay. And a malignant narcissist would be like, I don't give a shit if it's serving me. I'm not only going to cross the line, but I'm going to make you think that that was the right thing to do. And that, my friends, is the difference. He's a murderer. Miles is a murderer. And that's where I'm like, oh, maybe he crossed into psychopathy here. And the reason I'm saying psychopathy is because the murder happens and there's no guilt, there's no shame, and this gets a little bit more into like really deep spoilers here. But the man literally, like the whole thing of the movie is that they get the twin to play the person that had been murdered. And during the movie, he's seeing the person he thinks he murdered actually being alive. Like, he's thinking that she survived the murder attempt. And no addressing, no apology, nothing. Like, he acts like nothing is happening. Like, you can see the moment where his brain goes like, wait a second, I thought they were dead. And then they completely go into like, I'm not even going to talk about it mode. And you did not see a sense of relief, like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe I tried to kill you, I'm so sorry. Like, nothing. And that's just absurd, absolutely absurd. In this movie, I think these portrayals are all like exaggerations and way on the extreme. However, I'm not saying this is completely impossible. Like, I'm sure there are people who fall into these deep ends of the spectrum out there. And a few things that I thought were interesting that Mouse did was admitting that he's an idiot. But not from a place of self-awareness. Like, he at one point says only an idiot would kill Andy himself. And later in the movie, you learn that he actually tried to kill Andy himself a few times, actually. Because he tries to kill the twin that's playing Andy at one point, thinking it's Andy too. And that's in a way admitting that he is an idiot. But I'm sure if somebody was to call him out on it, he would deny being an idiot, right? Because Miles really thought he was the smartest person in the room. And that's the arrogance right there. He really thinks he is so smart. He can outsmart everyone, including a professional detective, law enforcement, people that have known him for years, his own partner. He really thinks he is the most incredible thing that has ever come to the universe since the beginning of time. And his cockiness and arrogance just show in how he kept the envelope. The envelope that proves that he fabricated evidence that Andy actually was the one who created the idea. And he kept it as a token of bragging about his victory in literally getting away with a scam and a murder. Another interesting thing about his beloved glass onion that's less layered is still there's a transparency to it, and it's a symbol of the person that's guilty, the sinner, being in plain sight. Now, there's one type of narcissist that I didn't think was portrayed with a character embodying that type, but I still want to talk about it, and it's the vulnerable narcissist, which a lot of people might refer to as covert narcissist. And this includes Dr. Ramani, but at one point I remember Dr. Ramani clarifying that she actually learned that covert narcissist is really more about like the hidden behaviors, like what's the unknown and unaware things that are happening in the mind of the narcissist, right? Or in their brains. But vulnerable is that woe is me, victimized type of narcissist. And this one is the one that gets me. This is the hardest one for me to pinpoint. I think Ramani has said this is the one that also gets her too, in terms of it's the longest one that it takes her to pick up on. And a vulnerable narcissist, they tend to look actually tends to be confused with depression. They tend to look very, very sad and victim-y. And they usually tend to have that failure to launch vibe to them, like, nobody likes me, and if people would help me, or if so-and-so would have helped me, I would have been able to succeed. But, I guess that's just how life is for me. That type of thing. And Miles pulls a little bit of a vulnerable narcissist vibe when he goes like, oh, I'm such a poor tortured millionaire. And it's that victimization, like, kind of making it look like everyone is out to get them. And with the vulnerable narcissist, the reason it kind of gets, it's not the same as covert is because, covert is more like hidden stuff. But vulnerable narcissists, when they're saying, woe is me, that's not really hidden. That's actually right out there. It just doesn't look grandiose. And that's where people get confused. And this is a particularly interesting flavor of narcissistic personality styles, because if you have empathy and you have a lot of compassion for people, like for me, the way I've experienced it is like, I feel so bad for them and I want to help them. I want to help them and I see their potential and I just want to help them get better. And then, I notice that doesn't matter what I do, they're not willing to get better. They don't want to get better. There's a stuckness in there. And, though it takes me longer to see it than other narcissistic personality styles, I am getting better at discerning it faster now. And there is a specific point where I go, oh, wait. They really are not doing anything to change their situation. And all they want is to complain and for me to listen to it, and somehow end up leaving the situation feeling worse about myself too. Okay, I see what we have here. I need to set some boundaries. That's how I have been dealing with that in the past few years now. I also want to talk about other roles that play into relationships or dynamics with narcissistic people. Because I want to, because as part of creating awareness, it's not just about the narcissist. There are also other people with different roles that get impacted. And the first role I want to tackle briefly is the role of the enabler. And this is the person that I consider half safe. And the problem with being half safe is that half safe is not fully safe. And that character is Lionel. Lionel is the scientist in the film. And you can see the lack of boundaries. He has very poor boundaries. He's getting faxes all the time, at all times of the night. And, he's dropping everything that he has to be at Miles' desire and needs, at any point in time whenever Miles needs him. He has that vibe of, going along to get along. He might not be like plotting these murders or these horrible things that the other people around him are doing, but he's also not calling it out. He's justifying. He's still willing to. He's still engaging in bad behavior, and I think for him is there's a fear of what could happen to him if he doesn't stay in line. That still is making him an accomplice to a lot of the really dubious stuff that's happening around him. And the thing with enabling bad behavior is that it is still bad and dangerous. Some enablers encourage survivors to stay in these abusive relationships. And the thing with this is, when you're in that mindset, you almost need the survivors that are also seeing it with you to also get on board with you, or otherwise, how are you going to stay in it? And that's when it becomes dangerous, because how many of us survivors stayed longer because someone told us, oh, that's just how they are, and it's. I guess, it's been a hard time of the year, and relationships are hard. Like, who has a perfect relationship out there? Like, things like that. That's stuff that enablers tend to say. And, dangerous stuff. Again, half safe is not safe. Now, I want to talk about the survivors, the victims and survivors of narcissistic abuse. In this movie, there are a few. The first one was Andy. In Andy's case, being a victim of survivor abuse cost her life. And in her case, she was dating a malignant narcissist, which was Miles. She went into business with him, trusted him with her business idea, which he stole. And at one point, I remember a very, very important choice of words, which was that, and she was reflecting back on why she was still friends with these people. She was like, I saw the potential in all these kids. And that's usually what gets us to get stuck in these relationships. Like we really, I'm speaking for myself here. I see the potential. I see the potential in them for greatness. And that was my Achilles heel in many of the relationships that I've experienced in the past. Now, in Andy's case, all these narcissistic people, they betrayed her in a heartbeat with no regard of her well-being, with no remorse. And, they turned on her the moment that it wasn't convenient for them to stay friends with her and be loyal to her. I remember Andy admitting that nobody liked Miles at first. And, Miles' grandiosity and his power and his resources, it won everybody else over. But at the end of the day, when you're not useful to Miles, he'll discard you. And he was willing to do that to every single one of them. I remember at one point Andy talking about the Mona Lisa. And essentially in the movie, Miles had like the actual Mona Lisa in his property. I forget how he got it, but he was supposed to have it for a while or something like that. And to me, that represented like a love bombing, like that grandiose, again, for supply, but that grandiose token that he can use to get supply and respect and admiration from other people. Now, poor Andy, I felt for her because, she showed her hand when she sent the email that was going to prove that, she was right and he had fabricated evidence against her. And Andy did it from a place of giving Miles an opportunity to make things right. And sadly, it cost her life because instead of taking that opportunity to make things right, Miles decided to murder her to make it go away. And it shows that, she trusted Miles even after the trial, even after cutting her off from the company, after everything. She trusted him until her last breath. The last sip that she took when she was poisoned, when she was killed, she still let him inside the house. And I want to briefly, highlight that because I feel like a lot of us, we've been there. We start seeing it and we try to end it, and then we trust them again and we let them back in and it happens again. And the cycle, I think they say it takes an average of 7 times to leave a domestic violence situation. And, I can say it took me a few times sometimes. And I want to say to you, if this has happened to you, I have so much compassion for you. I know what that feels like. And, in Andy's case, I don't want to say that, this is a film, this is a bit of an exaggeration, even though, let's be real, this happens too. Some people do lose their lives to these dynamics. And it shatters me to know that does happen. But with Andy, what I want to highlight is, she's a cautionary tale for trusting someone who has not shown that they're worthy of trust. When someone has stolen your idea, spent every possible penny they can to win a legal battle against you, to hurt you, isolate you from the friends. Because Andy introduced him to her friends. All those people that were, with Miles, Andy had introduced them to Miles. And he stole her friends, he stole her company, her idea, he stole her life. As a survivor, like having that moment when I realized, okay, I cannot trust this person anymore. They have shown me in every possible way that they're not worthy of my trust. They're not worthy of my respect. They're going to hurt me over and over again. And I'm done giving them millions of chances to make things right. Andy got betrayed in every single way. And sadly for her, she was not able to get out. Peg is another victim, mostly from Birdie. And she was the assistant. She was enabling, she was working for Birdie. This portrays that work relationship with a narcissist. And, you see her putting fires all the time, fixing all these tweets that Birdie would post that were just horrible. And, just putting up fires left and right, micromanaging, trying to prevent and control the situation. At the end of the day, she was going to lose her career when Birdie went down for the sweatshops. And sadly, that can happen. I hear of this, people that work for narcissistic people, they stay in these narcissistic organizations, for example, and then the organization, it comes out and they end up losing their jobs and their career gets severely impacted. And it's sad because I wouldn't say Peg is a bad person, but, being stuck in that situation can have some serious consequences. Next, I want to talk about Helen, who's the twin sister. And Helen turns into a survivor, and I think she's going to be a thriver. And one thing that Helen had was a very strong fight response. She does the whole speech where she calls everybody out and holding the golden when Helen is having what I'm going to call like appropriate responses to being in a very abnormal and traumatic and abusive situation. One thing that I found interesting is when she's breaking the glass and when she's giving them the speech and calling them out, people sit back. The rest of them sit back. Like Miles enjoys seeing her be unhinged. You can see that regulates him. Almost see like that makes him, I think the way I took it was like it almost makes him feel a little bit better about when he is dysregulated, because it's almost like, I'm in control here. And look at her. She is unhinged. Now, Helen burns the whole thing down literally. Like she broke the glass onion and she was able to expose all these people for who they are. And even though the movie ends in terms of prematurely with seeing the actual physical consequences, it's implied that there will be that they will be held accountable. At least I hope I sure hope so, because justice did deserve to be served on this one. Now, lastly, I want to talk about Blanc, who has morals, values. He keeps the system. He's wise. I love what he represents because he's almost like that person that gets to tell off the narcissists in a way that a lot of us are not able to in a safe way sometimes. And he solves the mystery. He sees things for what they are. And what I like about him is that he calls them out, but he calls them out from a place. He does it in a way that's subtle. One thing that I learned very early on in my journey was, you don't call the narcissist and tell them they are a narcissist. That's not likely to go very well. But there are different ways you can go about it, changing how you interact with them. In some cases, it can look like leaving. In some cases, it can look like staying, but staying in a different way that you've stayed before. And I like that Blanc is able to still hold his values to heart. And even though when people are acting disgustingly, he's still observing, he's still taking in the data, and he's still changing his behavior accordingly. And he takes actions in a much more quiet and subtle way. He ends up empowering Helen. And at the end of the day, they in this fictional work, they remain victorious at the end, which is not something that happens sometimes in real life for some of us. And I wish we all had a Blanc in our lives. Now, I hope you found this discussion helpful and that you're able to channel your inner Benoit Blanc when you are interacting with narcissistic people. In this week's Healing Invitation, I want to offer you a few things to reflect about. When you are hearing about the different types of narcissists, did anyone you know come to mind? If you are still in contact with that person, pay attention to how you feel next time you interact with them. Also, I will link Dr. Ramani Durvasula's YouTube channel, where you can learn more about the different types of narcissists and how their behavior presents depending on the type. Please let me know how this week's Healing Invitation goes if you choose to accept it. Before we wrap up this episode, all music and production is courtesy of yours truly. Also, I want to share a few ways you can help support this podcast. You can subscribe and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or the platform you are using to listen. Share this episode with anyone you can think can benefit from this content. Follow Hello Trauma Brain on Instagram with the handle @HelloTraumaBrain. Subscribe to the Hello Trauma Brain YouTube channel and hit the notification bell to be the first to know when I post a new episode. And you can make a donation by getting me a coffee through the official bio site. No worries, all links will be provided in the show notes. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you found this episode helpful. I wish you the best as you learn and heal from narcissistic abuse. It is time for our farewell affirmations. You are welcome to repeat after me. I am enough. I am lovable, and I deserve to heal. I wish you a gentle week, and thank you for listening.